All right. Hello, Digital Overdose. It's nice to finally be giving some presentations here. I'm going to be talking today about building a red team lab. And you might be wondering who exactly this guy is. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself really quick. My name is Affine Security. I also IRL name is Sam. You can find that on Twitter. Don't worry, there's not much. I don't have much OffSec defense against who I am. I do Purple Team at CVS Health as a part of their IT leadership development program. So it's kind of in between. I work full time for the company, but my work changes every 6 months or so. Right now, I'm working mainly with Purple Team, doing a lot of stuff in that space. So red teaming, blue teaming, mix of those activities. But it's been really fun. I've learned a lot, and definitely something that I'm planning on doing full time. I got my Bachelor of Science in Computer Technology just this past May, so recent college graduate. I'm a general InfoSec nerd. I am interested in a lot of stuff, just don't have the time to research everything, but anything InfoSec is always interesting to me. But my specialization is obviously in adversary emulation, red team infrastructure, and threat hunting, three areas that I am uh, mainly looking to improve my skills and what a lot of my work focuses on right now, where a lot of my interests lie. Before we get started, I do have to make this disclaimer. The opinions expressed in this presentation and in any corresponding comments are the personal opinions of the original authors and not those of CVS Health. I'm talking for me, not for my company. Nothing I say goes for them at all. So yeah, this is my own thoughts and all that kind of stuff. So, with that being said, I'll get into today's topics. And before I forget, I'm going to paste in the link to the presentation. So, if there's those of you who maybe want to follow along, you're just listening via audio and you want to check out the slides, there's a copy of the Google Slides right there. You can take a look at those. And they should be open for everyone to view. If there's permissions issues, let me know. I'll try to get them sorted. Anyway, today's topics we're going to talk about briefly what is red teaming and why you should make your own red team environment. We'll go through the kind of 5 levels that I have when it comes to building the red team environment, and then we'll cover next steps. As I am on a bit of a time crunch, I'm going to ask you guys to hold your questions from coming off mute. Please throw them in the tutoring channel, text channel, if you don't want to forget them. And I'll try to make stops at some point, or we just might wait till we get to the end of the presentation to open it up to any and all questions. But again, I normally would allow questions during the presentation, but just because I am on a bit of a time crunch, I want to make sure I get through all the content so you guys get as much information as possible. But throw them in the text channel. I'll try and check on them every so often, and we'll see if we can get some of your stuff answered. So, first of all, what exactly is red teaming? Because there is a lot of misconception around what exactly the area of red teaming is. You may think of it as more offensive security because it has often become uh, commonplace today where people will say, oh, the red team, and they're just referring to anyone who does any sort of offensive security activity. Same with blue team. Blue team is more anyone who does defensive security activity. But that's not necessarily the case. And especially in the context of this presentation, it's very important that we define what a quote unquote actual red team is. So I want to compare it versus pen testing since I'm sure a lot of you are much more familiar with that area than you are with quote unquote actual red teaming. So let's talk about it really quick. Pen testing, generally speaking, and again, this can change from organization to organization or field that you work in to field that you work in, but generally speaking, pen testing is focused on vulnerability discovery and exploitation of said vulnerabilities. They're going to prioritize finding a large quantity of these vulnerabilities and misconfigurations, and they may, from time to time, chain these vulnerabilities together in an attempt to gain access to specific data, but it really depends on what your task is. If you're doing a full-scale pen test, then you will likely do this, but maybe you're just a web app pen tester and you've just been given an application to test out, you might only just try to find the vulns and not necessarily see how much data you can get out of it. And pen testing typically is not as worried about stealth. It's more of can we even get to the data and how fast can we get to it. Red teaming is a little different. Red teaming is mainly focused on emulating real life threat actors. We are trying to, APTs, maybe if you're working at a very, very large corporation or for a government, but maybe more common nowadays is ransomware gangs trying to emulate the activity that they're doing as far as what are they doing to get access to these systems? What are they running once they're on these systems? Red teaming very much prioritizes getting access to sensitive data, again, without generating any alerts. And this is a key difference, I feel at least, there is between pen testing and red teaming is you're very much more so focused on subverting any sort of detection software that exists in the corporate network, and you want to get away from triggering any sort of alerts. And even if they do achieve their goals of accessing this sensitive data, they may go beyond that and just try to see what else can they get away with if they haven't been detected yet. And red teaming typically does not leverage any sort of vulnerabilities, but that really depends. I mean, there was stuff recently like system vulnerabilities, I guess like Hive Nightmare that we've seen, Print Nightmare. Both of those red teams may leverage stuff like that, but outside of it, they're usually trying to use existing techniques that will just get around detection and response software. And if you look at the slides, you'll see for a lot of slides, there's links in the speaker notes. There's a great article by Rapid7 that I've got picture alluding to here. Pirates versus Ninjas kind of goes over the difference between Red Team and Pentest Team. I think it's a great explanation. And then I've got a link to a YouTube video featuring Jean-Francois Mays. He's an awesome, awesome red teamer, and he does a great explanation of what exactly red team does. So if you want to watch that short segment, it's also a great way to learn about it. So, moving on, let's talk about why you should build your own red team environment. I think this has been really useful for me, mainly because red teaming has a much less clear learning path. When it comes to pen testing, you can do a lot of CTF stuff where you're practicing exploiting specific vulnerabilities. If you're doing a lot of web app, you can practice your SQL injection, you can practice your XML external entities, you can practice your server-side request forgery. There's specific methods that you can practice. Red teaming is a bit more open, a bit more fluid in comparison to pen testing. And that's partially because there's a consistent stream of new tools and techniques that you're constantly having to try out. People are releasing stuff all the time. Researchers are finding new ways to get around EDR solutions. So there's always new stuff to try out. Another thing is you're able to reset the environment easily if you mess something up. I feel like pen testing, there's not as much time where you're probably going to mess something up. I mean, maybe there's a small chance, but I've definitely seen in red teaming there's a much higher chance of you completely screwing up a system. I know one time I knew someone who generated a cmd.exe binary, which was actually a malicious binary, and somehow it replaced the standard cmd.exe on a Windows system. So anytime an application ever called cmd.exe, it would just basically spawn a bunch of beacons to call back to the C2 server. It was really funny, but that was another system time where it's like, oh, the system's broke. So this gives you the flexibility of completely resetting your environment. And it also provides you an opportunity to easily create and test new tools and techniques. So if you're into building your own stuff, this is a great way to do it. So with that being said, let's quickly cover our goals when we're trying to build this red team environment. So our goals here are to, first of all, host an enterprise environment. It's not going to be an exact replica, but it will basically be a very, very small version of what you would expect to see in a standard enterprise. It's also got to be able to host our C2 infrastructure. That's our command and control servers, which is very critical to red teaming activity. We should also be able to access it from our own attack machine, which we'll get into what that is later. And it should also be hosted locally on our own local area network. You could do this with a cloud solution, but that brings some additional complications as far as access to the servers, making sure that only we can get into it and there's not people randomly trying to get into your servers. Definitely doable, but I'm not going to cover it in this presentation. And if you want to try it out, let me know how it goes and if you find a way to do it, because I'd be really interested to hear about it. So let's talk about level one, and we're going to talk about hardware because since we're running this on our own local area network, we're going to want some sort of hardware. So our priorities for the hardware is the hardware should be able to host simultaneously should be able to simultaneously run multiple virtual machines at many VMs at the same time. And it should be easy to set up. That's our main things. Now, nice to haves, small form factor, quiet, and minimal heat. For me, this was very important because I live in a 500 square foot apartment, which is not the largest thing in the world. And so there are some solutions to this problem that will work, but will not be great for my space constraints. So there's a little bit of more specificity that I had to go with in particular. And the solution that I actually ended up going with was something called an Intel NUC, the next unit of computing. It's a very small form factor, headless PC. So it's about the size, if you take your hand and you just put your hand out and stretch out your fingers, it's probably about that big. It's not very large at all. Not very tall either. And the nice thing about it is it's got some really decent hardware in it. It's got a 4-core, 8-thread Intel i5 CPU, which is great. And you can purchase it without RAM or storage, which is really awesome because you can then customize this hardware however you'd like. For example, my setup here, you can see I've got 64 gigabytes of RAM and a terabyte of storage. The storage might be a little bit of overkill. The RAM's still slightly overkill, but if you've ever done anything with virtualization, especially virtualizing multiple different systems to run at the same time, you know that RAM is the first thing that will probably go on your system. So definitely make sure you invest in your RAM. I just went kind of full out on this system because I wanted to be able to run whatever I want, however much stuff I want, and just having the option with how much RAM I have and how much storage I have is great. Also, you may see online that Intel says you can only run 32 gigabytes of RAM in the system. That's wrong. You can run 64. People have researched this. So it's a really, really great solution. Only thing, it's a little expensive, and I know for some of you, especially if you're not interested in doing red teaming full time, or maybe you're in college, or you just don't have the financial ability to, purchase all this stuff at once. This is a bit of a tall ask. So I have some potential alternatives you could look into. If you have an old desktop tower, maybe your family has an old desktop tower that they're not using, you could easily just take that, maybe upgrade the RAM a little bit, and that should also function just fine. A old laptop might also work. I haven't really thought about trying that, but you could potentially do it. And it would also most likely need some sort of RAM upgrade. But these are some great options that you can at least consider for as far as your hardware solutions go. So we got our hardware set up. We know what we're going to do with it. Now we need to look at virtualization. And for our virtualization solution, we're going to focus on using what's called a Type 1 hypervisor. Now, I don't know our collective IT experience here, so I thought I'd quickly explain the difference between a Type 1 and Type 2 hypervisor. Type 2 hypervisors are software-level hypervisors that run on top of a full operating system, and you'll have the benefits of using a full OS, but more overhead for the virtualization. So, like VMware Workstation or Oracle's VirtualBox, if you've used those before, those are Type 2 hypervisors. So again, you've got to run it on top of Windows or Linux, and you have that full operating system taking up some useful system resources on top of the hypervisor. But for Type 1, it runs directly on hardware. You can consider it as sort of an operating system in and of itself, but it's not a full-featured operating system at all. It's only there to help host your virtualized servers and all that, but it brings much less overhead than a full operating system. And some examples of this would be Proxmox and VMware's ESXi. So again, we're going to be going more with the Type 1 hypervisor solution. And in this case, I'm going to be using Proxmox as my selection for virtualization. It's a free Type 1 hypervisor, and it's really easy to use and got a lot of features that we can utilize. VMware ESXi is nice, and I believe it is free, but I'm not as big of a fan. It's not as easy to use and easy to learn as Proxmox, in my opinion. But if you're interested in doing any sort of system administration work, or maybe your work deals with system administration and maybe you want to move more into virtualization, ESXi could be cool because ESXi is used by a lot of corporations when it comes to virtualization. So I'll quickly show you guys around Proxmox since we should have some time here. This is my Proxmox server. As you can see, it's just run on a got a web server that I can access to get to this dashboard. We can see all these statistics. And over here, we've got all of my virtual machines. So I've got a couple team servers here. I've got my actual endpoints. I've got a proxy server, all this stuff. And you can see statistics on everything. And it's really easy to go ahead and make one. You just hit like create VM. You'll have ISOs that you upload and store. So, your Windows, your Linux, whatever it is, you just, select the operating system, select other system details, how big a hard drive, how much hard drive space you want to give to it, how many CPU cores, how much memory, what network you want to connect it to, all that kind of stuff. But Proxmox makes it very, very easy to get all this set up. So I really like it as a solution. I've not had an issue with it so far, and I can keep things running and have absolutely no issues whatsoever. So That's our type 1 hypervisor in our virtualization selection. And now that we've got that done, I want to cover a bit of the architecture of how we're architecting this and setting it up. So here's a little layout that we've got here. We got our router and our switch. Again, this could just be your standard home consumer grade router that has the switch integrated into it. But either way, I just have a separate router and switch set up in this diagram in particular. So basically, all we're going to have is our host desktop with an attacker VM on it. So this is your standard PC. Like I'm running Arch Linux and I've got like VirtualBox or whatever on there, stuff like that. Um, you can use that, and that's going to be your setup over here. We'll dive more into that later on. But then over here we have the Intel NUC with the Proxmox. And what we have here is Proxmox uses something called virtual bridges. So these VMBR0 here. And what you're going to do is you'll end up hooking all of your devices that you're going to have on the network. In this case, our 2 victim virtual machines and our C2 server. They're all going to hook into this virtual bridge. And what that will do is it'll allow these servers to be accessed on the local area network. So I can assign these IPs that work on my local area network, and I'll be able to ping them from this machine, which is very, very important in order for us to be able to test things out. So yeah, it's a pretty standard setup. It's pretty simple. You could try setting things up to where the victim VMs are on their own separate quote unquote network. But I have had some difficulties with it. So if you want to try that out and you figure it out, please let me know because I'm interested to see what solutions you can come up with. But yeah, it's a pretty standard setup, and this should usually only follow the defaults that you need for Proxmox because I believe it should default you to VMBR0 every time. So yeah, nothing too complicated, but it's nice to see how be able to visualize how exactly all this stuff is set up. I think we have some time to take any questions at this point. If there's anything confusing, we'll take a stop before we dive more into the operating systems. I'll give you guys, if you want to throw something in the chat really quick, or if you want to come off mute and ask a question, I'll give you a minute or two to do so. All right, I'll take that as solid no questions at all. So we'll keep moving swiftly onward to our operating systems. So operating system choice is very important here because our operating systems need to achieve one of 2 goals. They either need to have easy usability for attackers, and these are going to pertain more so to our uh, to, uh, to our systems that our attackers will be utilizing. Or they're also going to want to properly emulate a corporate network at a very basic level. So if the operating system falls into one of those 2 categories, we can probably use it. So let's get into our operating system selection for our victim environment. So as with any sort of red team emulation red team environment, I guess I should say, the main operating system we are going to be going for is Windows, because for any corporate network, there is a high likelihood they are running Windows endpoints and Windows servers with Active Directory on them. That is the norm for many organizations. And since we want to be able to test for the norm, and that's probably what any organization you'd be working for would have, we're setting it up in this specific type of way. So for a victim endpoint, we have a copy of Windows 10 Enterprise. You get a free 90-day trial on Windows 10 Enterprise. And since there's minimal configurations we're actually going to be putting on this endpoint, we don't really care about the 90-day trial. We can just rebuild it at the end of it, and it will be totally fine. It's a very quick setup. As well as for the victim domain controller, we're going to have Windows Server 2019. I usually just pull down whatever the latest ISO is, and in this case, it was Server 2019. I know Server 2022, I think, has a trial ISO out. You could mess with that if you wanted, but obviously, there's going to be very few organizations that are probably using that at this point, so I recommend that you stick with something that is at least usable. So 2019, maybe even 2016 if you wanted to. And this will need to be set as a domain controller and requires minimal configurations. Now, if you're not a Windows admin or don't have any experience with Windows system administration or setting all that stuff up, Don't worry. Again, in the speaker notes section, there's links to the ISOs and also to an awesome script by Brown InfoSec guy. Great dude, fellow Canadian. It's his AD Lab PowerShell script, and basically it will help you um, automate the configuration of those servers. So it will help you auto set up a domain controller. It'll just kind of prompt you like, hey, what do you want the domain name to be? What do you want? Do you want to set the DNS server to itself? All that kind of stuff. And then getting your endpoint configured. Okay, do you want it to join the domain? Set the DNS server, all those kinds of things. So it's a great script. Even though I'm relatively familiar with Windows System Administration, I still used it. So I highly recommend you check it out and utilize it because it makes your life so much easier. Now, as far as our more attacker-focused endpoints, let's talk about the operating systems we're going to use there. So the C2 server, I use Debian for mine, but you can really choose almost any Linux operating system. I personally recommend Debian because the C2 server that I use, which is Empire by BC Security, um, they recommend Kali or Debian. I know they've tested on both of those operating systems, so that's the only reason I do it. Uh, but again, you can pretty much pick whatever, and you could also try if you want to mess around with Linux containers, LXC. There, I know there's a Kali Linux container that you could try out, and that might make it easier to install our C2 server once we get to that point. For attacker machines, these are going to be kind of the endpoints that you're operating off of. Kali Linux, Parrot OS, either of those are really fine. But again, almost any Linux operating system is going to do. You just need what would likely be easier to have a security distribution that has some existing tooling on it. Because while there isn't too much tooling we're going to pull from security distros, there is some. So if you just want to be simple, use Kali Parrot. That's nice. If you prefer to use another operating system, you can just use that and pull down the specific tools that you're going to need. An optional virtual machine that we can go through is a development machine with Windows 10. And again, Windows 10 is pretty much free to use forever, just the standard version. There's a few things that you can't do, but we don't really care about those things in this case. And it's really nice for development and testing of Windows-related binaries. There's a lot of projects that you'll see out there for red teaming that are written in C# and don't come in precompiled binaries. You can only download the C# files from GitHub. So the Windows machine is really useful in order to be able to compile those binaries. And if you want to make modifications and then test them out real quick on the machine, it's much easier to do that than to try and get it on the victim machine and, oh shoot, it doesn't work. I got to move back and fix things. So I find it quite convenient. But again, that might be something that's for people who are really interested in red team and really want to dive into it. That's why I only say it's optional. You really only need the attacker machine and the C2 server. And I want to get to the final level, which is software, because there are a few key pieces of software that are going to be required in this setup. And that, of course, is a C2 server and client, endpoint detection, attack machine virtualization, binary generation, and malware development. If you don't know what we're going to use for any of those, don't worry. I'll try to explain things a little bit if it doesn't make sense. All right, let's jump into it. So for our C2 server and client, I'm using, as I briefly alluded to before, uh, BC Securities Empire C2 server and the Starkiller front end. It is a feature-rich C2 server that has a relatively simple setup for both server and client. If you're on Kali, you literally just do sudo apt install PowerShell Empire and you're good to go. If you're on a system like Debian, there's a bit more of a process to install it, but it's still very easy. They've got great documentation on it, and again, it's also linked in the speaker notes on how to do the documentation. And the Star Killer GUI is well designed and easy to use. I personally recommend using a GUI because for most C2s that you find out in the world, they're going to have GUIs because red team operators quite often will work in teams and multiple people will be accessing said servers. And so using a very simple to use graphical user interface is much easier than trying to do all this connected with command line. So it's very interesting because I know for me, a lot of my experience, so much was stressed like, you need to do this command line, you need to do this command line, you need to do this command line. But honestly, I highly recommend that you do the GUI in this case. And we should definitely have some time later, so I'll show more of this off so you can see what it's like. Um, Lima Charlie, this is one I actually will take some time now to show it off a bit more because it's a really cool piece of software. So Lima Charlie is a cloud-based solution that has solid detections for your endpoint. So basically, what this is going to do is it's going to be kind of our endpoint detection and response solution for the server. And if you don't know what EDR is, endpoint detection and response, you could basically imagine it's like antivirus but on steroids because it can do a lot more than just signature based analysis. It can look at activity. I'll show you a bit more, but it can look at correlate certain events, and you can write a bit more open-ended detections that will look for specific activity as opposed to just, oh, signature bad, stop process. uh, but this Limit Charlie is not fully corporate level enterprise solution. At least maybe it is, but I'm too dumb to figure out how to make it extremely effective. But for our use cases, it's fantastic. For a number of reasons. Because first of all, it stores logs for up to a year, which is really nice. And when you're using two agents, the platform is actually free. It's technically supposed to cost $1 a month, which is still insanely affordable. But I've noticed that I've been charged to it, and I believe, if I remember correctly, if you have two agents, it shouldn't really cost you any money. And it's got great features for event analysis and detection writing. So I want to show this off really quick because I'm going through this much quicker than I thought. So this is Lima Charlie here. You'll basically create an organization, pretty easy, and you'll enable an add-on called Sigma Rules, which is an open source set of detection rules that Lima Charlie will pull in and activate. So, for example, I'll go to my detections dashboard here, and you can see we've got some detections from me messing around with stuff. So we've got an Empire PowerShell launch parameters here. So this is a detection that was made by Lima Charlie through Sigma rules, and we can see the name of the rule here. You can see what exactly the event was. Let's see if I can drag this out a bit more. I don't think I can. But you can, oh, here we go. You scroll over, you can see the event, is running PowerShell. Um, we can see, parent process IDs, really useful stuff if you're on blue team. So it's super helpful. But for red team as well, it's good to know whenever we get caught. And this is my favorite part of it, is the event timeline. So if we click view event timeline, you can see this whole process timeline here that got it started. So if I look, if you'll let me move, we can see that there was explorer.exe, and then it ended up running PowerShell, and then we got PowerShell again, and then we've got other stuff here. But you can see the whole timeline of what happened with Explorer, and then we have PowerShell actually got ran, and we should, I believe, in here be able to see the uh, PowerShell. We might be able to see. I don't think we can see the PowerShell commands that was on it. But either way, it's a great, great way to see the process that the processes that spawned the initial detection. I think there's a more interesting one I'll go down to here that I did earlier. Um, Running who am I showing privileges. This one is a good one. So this picked up based on the fact that I ran who am I whack priv, which is a typical command that attackers will run. And we can actually see here that here's a parent process, which is cmd.exe whack who am I slash priv. And then we have this link.exe as the parent process as well. And this is actually the malicious binary that got ran on the system. And so this timeline helps you correlate all these things of like, oh, whoami.priv got ran, but how did it get there? Oh, this link.exe got ran. And in an organization, you might be like, we don't use link at all. This should not be running. Boom, this is immediately an issue. We need to lock this device down. So yeah, Lima Charlie's really cool. And it gives you a great opportunity to look and understand kind of the nitty gritty parts of the Windows operating system and how EDR will correlate all these events and checking out processes and stuff. And it'll also help you figure out, what's getting you caught as a red teamer. So yeah, I love this software. I think this solution is freaking fantastic, and I'm so glad that they have it. Really an easy install process. So I just wanted to make sure I definitely showed that off because it's an integral part of doing red team stuff. You have to have knowledge of the blue side of things. segueing back to the main presentation, let's go for more of our software selection. We're going to go with Attacker Virtualization, Oracle's VirtualBox, free virtualization software, pretty easy to use. I use it all the time. I love it. You can use VMware if you prefer, but my recommendation, if you haven't used anything before, use VirtualBox. It's pretty easy to use. Another piece of software selection I want to go over is for binary generation. So as a red teamer, a lot of the time you're going to want to build out binaries that you can that you'll run on your victim machines to get a call back to your C2 server. And Scarecrow is this really awesome project by the people over at Optiv that generates payloads using shellcode, which a lot of C2 servers can generate. And you can make binaries, you can make DLLs, you can make macros for Excel files, things like that. It can make tons of stuff. And I will say that our C2 server Empire can actually generate shellcode that you should be able to use. I've had a bit of trouble getting that to work, but you also have the option of using MSF Venom to generate some shellcode as well. So that's a great option as well. And the cool thing about Scarecrow and what I love about it is that it unhooks from AMC and ETW to evade EDR. For those who don't know, AMC, the anti-malware scanning interface, and ETW, event tracing for Windows, are two very key parts of how EDR will get information about what's going on in the operating system and then be able to interpret that to find out whether something malicious is happening or something isn't. So being able to execute something with AMC and ETW patched out is awesome because those EDR solutions don't get the insight into what's really going on at a really deep level, and you can get away with some pretty awesome stuff. So yeah, up to Scarecrow, check it out. Cool project, mess around with, have some fun. For malware development, again, this is more if you're really into red team, if you really want to mess with some malware dev kind of stuff, if you want to start building your own tools or again your own types of malware. Visual Studio's 2019 is probably the best IDE for malware development on that Windows virtual machine we talked about earlier. It's easy to use for both C# and C++. That's most of what I see when it comes to tool malware development as far as red teamer usage. And especially C#. C# if you is very popular amongst people in the Windows world because EDR solutions and Microsoft and other corporations have really cracked down on PowerShell usage. PowerShell is very likely to get caught if you ever run anything. But people have found many ways that you can utilize C# and get away with a lot of stuff that you used to be able to get away with PowerShell. So it's a great language to cover. But the one thing I will warn you about if you do want to use Visual Studio, it can take up a heck of a lot of space. So make sure you give your Windows VM a healthy amount of storage. I forget if I have like 30 or 40 gigabytes, and I probably could still use even more if I wanted to download more additions to Visual Studios. So yeah, that is my recommendation. We're going to stop here. We've got plenty of time left, so I'm going to kind of show you guys through my own personal environment a bit more. But does anyone have any questions at this point? Anything at all that they want to ask? I know I'm sure I'm going through a lot, so even if it's like, hey, fine, this made absolutely no sense. Can you run this by me again one more time? I'm more than happy to do that. So any questions at all at the moment? All right. I'll take that as a no. So let's go take a tour of some of the software that we're using. Whoops, should probably throw that back in presenter view. Cool. All right, let's go take a look at some of the stuff that I'm using here. So we already went over Lima Charlie because Lima Charlie is cool and I like it a lot. Let's now go through what can we go check out? Let's go check out the C2 server. So let me pull up uh, VirtualBox here, pull that over. And we'll also see my operating system. So I've got Kali Linux running here. Really, between Parrot and Kali, the only reason I picked Kali was because I had an extra Kali VM, and Parrot was mostly for my CETF kind of stuff. So I just didn't want to use the same one for red teaming, so I used a different one. It really doesn't matter. Um, so yeah, that's kind of why I went with Kali. So we'll go in here, check some of this stuff out. Go look at PowerShell Empire as well, and the Starkiller GUI. Come on, Callie. All right. So log in, very secure password, and come on, you can do it. All right, on the box, let's go get into our folder and let's go check out what my setup would be. So let's go to Documents and go to Red Team, and we're gonna run Starkiller. Starkiller also runs in this app image format, which basically works, as far as I'm aware, with any Linux operating system. So very easy to run. So I'm gonna run Starkiller. Um, and I'll get auto logged in, but you're normally gonna have to log in, just put in your server IP, and then pretty sure it's like Empire admin and password 123 for credentials. So very secure in the world of security. But again, we're only on a local area network that we control, so we're not too worried about that. So Starkiller here, I'll kind of give you a quick crash course in C2 servers. You set up your listener, which is basically kind of like your NC-TAC LVMP if you've done CTF stuff, but it will listen to multiple connections. This one I've just got an HTTP listener, nothing special about it. It's pretty basic. Showing on port 80, yeah, nothing crazy. Then we got all our different kinds of stagers. Uh, I've got a couple ones I tried testing as Windows shellcode. Haven't had too much luck with it, but I'll try it a bit more. Multi-launcher is one I want to test, but I haven't done too much with it. Windows C Sharp. This is awesome. So Empire in their most recent patch introduced a bunch of C Sharp capabilities to the platform, which is fantastic because, as I said, PowerShell, real sketch, C Sharp is way better. So I recommend that if you do download PowerShell Empire, go into this plugins and the C Sharp server and make sure you have start and you hit submit so the server runs. You'll know it's not running because when you set up your C Sharp listener, which I don't have much here, or a C Sharp stager rather. I just went in, picked the listener, which was HTTP, language C Sharp, set the .NET version to 4.0. That's pretty common. The out file is fine. I have the obfuscate in. I haven't messed around with this all that much. I should probably mess around with it a bit more. But when you go over here, there'll be an option to download, and you can save it wherever you want. If it saves, and it saves as a 0 kilobyte file or whatever, just a completely empty file, that means your C Sharp server plugin is not running. So you got to get that running and started. So we've got that. And I actually got one to run. We can see actually a few of them are calling back here. We've got the names set up. We can see what process ran it. So we've got this PowerShell one. I'm actually going to go ahead and kill this off because we don't need it. So pretty much, you know what? I'll kill this guy as well, um, just so I can show you how this stuff works. Let's go get... that's probably pretty hard to see. Let me zoom in there. That's a little better. Let's real click. I'm going to pull up Ramina. Ramina is what I use for RDP since I'm on a Linux system. I recommend it. I've had pretty good luck with it. And just make sure you get set up for RDP server usage on your operating systems once it's ready. So I'm just going to connect real quick. And one setting I do have in Ramina, I'll show you guys real quick as well, is I have a shared folder set up. So I have this red team shared folder, and that is shared with this Kali VM, my Windows development VM, and also it's shared with obviously this Windows VM. Kind of hard to see, I know, but don't worry, you're not really missing all that much. Um, uh, but I highly recommend that you set up a shared folder in VirtualBox, so it's really easy to connect stuff. And when it mounted, I also set up I go to Defender, Windows Security. I have Windows Defender turned off right now, which you should also do that on your endpoints because it's weird, but a lot of red teamers do operate without using Windows Defender because most companies just rely on their own EDR solution. If you're trying to do stuff that specifically bypasses Defender, then yeah, obviously turn it on. But I typically leave it off. But I also add exclusions, so you can see this. I have an exclusion here, and this is actually for that shared folder because it gets mounted as its own network drive on here. So you can actually see if I pull up this shared folder over here in Kali. Whoops. Let me pull up that folder. If we go to Documents, go to Red Team, open folder. You can see shared here. We've got CMD.exe, OneDrive, Sharphook, SharpIR. Yeah, we've got all that stuff and it's shared right here. So it's really easy to just build it on this machine, drop it in the folder, and it will show up on this one. So these beacons should be dead now. Can I hide them? Oh, they're not gonna hide, are they? Yeah, these should be marked as stale. Oh well, that's fine. We'll see the new one pop up. So you're gonna see if I run SharpIR here. SharpIR is gonna run. And there we go. We see a new agent gets a callback here. Um, so we've got that. We've got our agent set up. Now, if you're using a C2 server for the first time, you'll probably not be used to the whole job format, especially if you're coming from CTFs where it's kind of instantaneous. You run stuff and it happens. Since again, red teaming is very much about stealth, and we want to hide from the uh, the blue team security operations center and stuff like that. What we do is we'll have the server will only call back every X amount of time. Right now, I think it's set for this server around 60 seconds, somewhere like that. But a lot of times it could be way longer. It could be 30 minutes, could be an hour, even longer. Really depends on what you're trying to achieve. And they'll also set up a jitter interval. So basically, it won't always be consistently on the hour or on the half hour. It'll be, maybe 29 minutes, 28 minutes, sometimes 27 minutes. You could put in a big amount of jitter. But because of this format, basically what happens is you can try to run multiple commands at the same time, but they won't all get run until your beacon calls back to the C2 server to get some new jobs to execute. So like if I do dir and then who am I whack priv, you'll see the shell commands are going to be queued. Um, we should get them pop up so you can see. And we got the callback from the C2. Oh, this must be a little bit faster callback. But dir and who am I whack priv both got callbacks, so we can see we're hackme k reese. And then we've got the current directory that we're in has OneDrive, CMD, SharpIR, and Sharphook, which is good to know. Oh, I forgot to mention that brown infosec guy script. Sorry. I'll also make you some your own users to use on the test environment. One of them is an admin. The rest of them are just standard users. So this K-Reese guy was generated by that script, which is really nice. Makes things a lot easier. So yeah, you can run shell commands. We can run a bunch of different modules. Again, I like to stick with the C# stuff. So we can go, let's go to sharp. What do I want to use? Actually, let's do seatbelt. Goes back to seatbelt. Let's run our .NET 4.0, and then we'll do group users. Again, really nice UI because if you haven't used seatbelt and you don't know what commands you're supposed to be running, it can be kind of hard, but I'm really glad that they implemented a bunch of this stuff where it's very easy to pick what you want to use. So we'll hit submit, and then we'll have to wait because again, it's not instantaneous. We got module execution queued, and we get our information back. So what kind of information did we get off this? Wow, we got a lot of stuff. Fun times. Um, so anything interesting from red team perspective? Histories. That's kind of cool. That can be interesting sometimes. What else we got here? Um, Mimicat stuff. Idle time. Okay, cool. Favorites. Internet Explorer URLs. All right, cool. A bunch of interesting stuff. And usually what I'll go from there is I'll go over to Lima Charlie and just refresh and see if anything gets caught. Typically, you should wait a couple minutes to see if stuff gets caught. I don't know how long it generally takes Lima Charlie to go through the logs and figure out what the heck is going on. But if something does happen, you'll see it pop up here. And I will tell you that the Windows Update Client Lolbin, that's a pretty big false positive because I did not run anything to make this stuff pop up. So you can usually just ignore those. So anyway, that's Empire. Empire's cool. You got other stuff. You can save credentials here if you wanted to like simulate a real red team engagement for reporting stuff. And, this is really nice where it's got timestamps on all the stuff that you run. Red teaming documentation is the frickin' most important thing because if you don't document it, it didn't happen. So the fact that it has all this stuff is really, really awesome. But yeah, Starkiller, PowerShell, Empire, great place to start off. What else do I need to show off? I mean, the Windows environment, there's not really much to write home about. It's just a standard Windows environment. Um, Scarecrow, again, it's kind of just follow the commands for Scarecrow that it lists here on the GitHub page. Got some pretty basic ones here that you can run to generate binaries. Quite nice. Really useful. I can show off a bit more Proxmox. There's a lot of cool stuff you can do. The one thing, if you do get Proxmox, I highly recommend you set up Xterm.js. I'm going to put a link now to the Xterm.js setup. Oh, crap. Ah, go back. All right. I'll throw a link in the tutoring chat. There is the in the tutoring channel, we've got the link to that. If you do set up Proxmox, Xterm.js is really nice because if you look at these servers, you can see you've got the console here, but this is all VNC, so I can't copy paste into these servers. So if you have, but you have Xterm.js, that pulled up in a different tab, we can actually use these, and I could copy and paste. Like if I wanted to paste, like if I wanted to git clone this down, ls, we'll get out of here, git clone. I can actually paste in OptiScarecrow, and we can clone into that stuff. So Xterm.js is super duper nice, especially when you're doing the initial configurations. Also download Screen. Screen is a Linux utility that I can attach, and you can see this is my Empire server. It's basically been running in the background because I ran Screen and then started up here and then just did the initial setup was just Screen, and that was the only command I ran, and then just jump in here, and then you do Control A and then D to exit to detach from it, and then you just do Screen tac RX to attach to the server. So really nice, and you don't have to worry about if you want to do some additional configurations, you don't have to worry about stopping your server to add some additional things onto the server, which is really quite nice. I think that kind of shows off a lot of the stuff that I really wanted to cover at this point. So, any questions as far as the overviews go, of like kind of the stuff that we covered? Any questions about the capabilities of any of the platforms? I can do my best to try and answer. All right, cool. So with that giant segue out of the way, let's talk about what now. Now that you've got your environment, you've got everything set up. What can you do, especially if you're new to red teaming? What can we try and what can we do to improve our skills? Get on Twitter and follow some red team lists. I've got some lists in the speaker notes again on this slide that I use every day to pull information from. Super duper useful. Find an interesting technique or tool on Twitter, test it out, see if it works, and see if you get caught. If you didn't get caught, success, awesome, great job. If you did, try and make sure you don't get caught the next time. And a bonus challenge, if you want to get more into purple teaming, the defensive side, try and write a detection for the thing that you executed and got away with, and see if it'll catch it. And the big challenge there is to try to not generate too many false positives, and to try and think like in a real corporate network, what could I write that would generate a very small amount of false positives. With that being said, that's going to be everything from me. Um, Thanks for listening. I hope you found this informative. I know it's a lot of information. I know there's a lot of stuff, but I'm always happy to talk to people about it. If you have any questions, you can connect with me on Twitter at Affine Security. You can add me on Discord and DM me anytime. The only thing I ask is you follow the due diligence rules. So if you have a question, give it a shot of trying Googling and seeing if you can figure out the answer for yourself. But if it's not something that you're sure about, even from Googling, or Google did not result in any answers that you found satisfactory, you can absolutely message me, especially for opinion-based questions. I know that's very difficult to get on Google, so hopefully I'm more than happy to help out. And if you have any questions on getting the environment set up, run into any issues, I may have run into the same issues, so I can help you out. I've got a blog as well. I don't post up much on there recently because I've been learning a ton of new stuff. But I am hoping to post some more Red Team related content on there. So hopefully you guys will follow there. And I have a blog that I contribute to called PR Purple Team or PRPLTM. Hasn't been too much on there, but if you're really in the red teaming, if you do that as part of your job, or you really want to do that as part of your job, you can see some kind of uh, real world purple teaming scenarios that we deal with, and what we did as far as the offensive side and what we do as part of the defensive side. But yeah, that's it from me. I'll give it one final opportunity for people to ask any sort of questions and go over how any of this stuff works. Uh, I'll if we don't have any questions, if people just want to ask when they're not being recorded, that's fine too. I'll stop the recording in a couple seconds, and then we can you can come off mute and ask those. All right. Well, if we have no questions, thanks for coming again. Hope you learned something. Again, reach out if you have any sort of questions, anything you're confused about. Y'all should have the slides now so you can go over it again. There's a bunch of great links in there. I implore you to check them out. And thank you guys so much for having me. Shout out again to Digital Overdose, the server being awesome and letting me ramble on about red teaming for about an hour. So if anyone has any more additional questions, I'll stop the recording in just a second and let you guys ask. But otherwise, if you're heading out, have a good rest of your day, and I'll hopefully talk to y'all later.